In the year 1795, Wisconsin was not yet a state. Instead, it was just a part of the Northwestern Territory. At this time, the Menominee Native Americans controlled over 10 million acres of land.
1795 was also the year that a Menominee Native American was born. His name was Oshkosh, and he was born in an area called the Old Kings Village in Nakusa. It was a half-mile up the Fox River near Green Bay. He would eventually become a very important and influential chief over the Menominee Indians.
When Oshkosh was 17 years old, the War of 1812 was going on. He and a band of Menominee warriors allied with the British against the Americans. Eventually, the Americans had defeated the British, and the Menominees began to ally with the United States in the future battles of the Black Hawk War.
Around this time, Oshkosh's grandfather placed him under the guidance of Toma, the head chief at the time. In 1827, when Toma died, Oshkosh took his place as head chief and began to lead the Menominees.
10 million acres of land was being controlled by the Menominees. However, the United States government wanted it for themselves. They felt as though the Native Americans were in the way of potential farming, which would help advance the U.S. greatly.
In the 1830s, a significant event occurred called the Trail of Tears. This is when the U.S. was forcing many natives off of their land, not just the Menominees. While other Native Americans left for Oklahoma, losing many of their people along the way by disease and starvation, Chief Oshkosh said no.
The Trail of Tears did not affect the Menominee Indians. Chief Oshkosh was negotiating treaties with the United States and gave them some of his warriors to assist the U.S. in battle. After a little while, Oshkosh agreed to give them a small amount of land. For 6 years, the U.S. tried to claim it for themselves, but Oshkosh kept saying no. Since there were language barriers, the U.S. was able to trick Oshkosh into giving away more land than what he originally agreed to give away.
Eventually, the U.S. pressured the Menominees into giving away all of their land, but promised them a new home in what is now Minnesota. Chief Oshkosh still protested against this. The land in Minnesota could not fit their needs since it lacked the proper plants and environment for their ways of medicine making, food growing, and building skills. This area the U.S. promised them was also between two warring tribes, and Oshkosh knew that if he agreed to this, it would lead to the death of his people.
At this time, Wisconsin was a part of the Northwestern Territory, since it had been won back from the British by the U.S. after the American Revolution. Many people were beginning to move into this area now that the Menominee owned next to nothing. In 1836, Andrew Jackson, the president at the time, appointed Henry Dodge as governor. Wisconsin was now a state since the population was finally big enough.
The U.S. was still trying to convince Oshkosh to lead his people into Minnesota, but he continued to fight for his land. In 1856, Oshkosh was able to get the U.S. to sign a treaty that preserved 235,000 acres of land along the Wolf River for the Menominees to keep.
The Menominees could now start rebuilding their homes and fixing their forests. Before the treaty was signed, the U.S. had cut down many of the Menominees' forest trees, leaving very little left for the Menominees to use. Forests were beyond important to them due to the fact that they used the wood for canoes, housing, and many other things.
Chief Oshkosh came up with a method that consisted of only cutting down old or dying trees and harvesting them from west to east. This system allows for young and healthy trees to grow much better than before. This method of forest preservation was so effective that to this day, you can see the Menominee Forest from space.
Some important considerations that are a part of Oshkosh's forest management plan include shade tolerance, structure, condition, and age distribution. This plan worked so well that the Menominees taught their ways to many other people, which made its way all around. This was used by many people throughout the world. This method is still used to this day and continues to help forests survive and prosper.
As Chief Oshkosh got older, he became an alcoholic and weighed over 400 pounds. He continued to live an unhealthy lifestyle up until August 29, 1858, when he got in a drunken brawl and lost his life. He was 63 years old.
Menominee land reservation and forest managements aren't the only impacts that Oshkosh has made in Wisconsin. The city of Oshkosh is named after him for being a strong and powerful chief. and today in the popular city is where many tourists will visit the Outlet Mall, lots of restaurants, and the Experimental Aircraft Association, otherwise known as EAA, the world's largest air show.
Cheif Oshkosh even had a beer created after him. During the Prohibition in 1928, when alcohol was illegal, a non-alcoholic near beer was created by Felix Gertsch, brewmaster of the Oshkosh Brewing Company. The beer was called the Cheif Oshkosh Special. This beer was incredibly popular since it tasted almost exactly like regular beer. The new company called People's Brewing bought it, but it eventually stopped being produced when the company closed in 1972.
Cheif Oshkosh was buried in the tribal lands near Kashina, but was given permission by his grandson Chief Reginald Oshkosh to be reburied in Menominee Park in Oshkosh. A large parade was held in his honor of his life to commemorate his reburial.
This parade was a huge deal, so much so that the mayor of Oshkosh requested that everyone had the day off of work. It took place on May 25th, 1926, and the day consisted of a luncheon, airplanes flying over, marching bands of 200 people, acrobats, and nearly 200 floats, with one carrying Cheif Oshkosh's body.
Several city officials attended alongside many Menominee Indians. It was reported that over 20,000 people attended this event, all to celebrate the life of Cheif Oshkosh and the contributions he had made to Wisconsin. The entire event costed $12,000 and was funded by Alfred Kraft McComb, who was a very wealthy man because of his timberland sales in many other states, including parts of South Africa. The citizens greatly appreciated McComb's generosity, and they loved learning more about their city's history.
The day ended with reburying his body below a statue that was made in his honor. The statue resides in Menominee Park with his body resting underneath. He was moved from his original burial spot 68 years after his death, and the statue is now a popular site that people can visit and pay their respects.
Although not many people celebrate Cheif Oshkosh Day now, it was a huge deal back then, and everyone should know about the contributions he had made to not only Oshkosh or Wisconsin, but the entire world. Forrest would be very different if he had not come up with his forest management plan that many people used and still use to this day. He is a very honorable man that everyone should know about.